Question 1. Compliance review shows that the Alabama legislature is undertaking a redistricting process. Considering the significant impact of the Voting Rights Act on electoral map drawing, what is the most critical principle that must guide the creation of new legislative districts to ensure legal and ethical compliance? Option A. Utilize historical redistricting methodologies without significant alteration, as these have been previously accepted. Option B. Focus primarily on maximizing the partisan advantage of the incumbent party while ensuring districts are geographically contiguous. Option C. Prioritize the creation of districts that afford minority communities an equal opportunity to elect representatives of their choice, actively assessing and mitigating any potential for vote dilution. Option D. Draw districts with a clear minority-majority population, assuming this automatically satisfies all Voting Rights Act requirements. Correct answer is C. Prioritize the creation of districts that afford minority communities an equal opportunity to elect representatives of their choice, actively assessing and mitigating any potential for vote dilution. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because redistricting in Alabama, particularly in light of the Voting Rights Act, VRA, requires a delicate balance between established political considerations and the fundamental mandate to prevent racial discrimination in voting. The VRA, as interpreted by federal courts, imposes significant constraints on how electoral districts can be drawn, demanding careful analysis and adherence to legal precedent. Professionals involved in this process must navigate complex legal requirements and potential political pressures, making sound judgment and a thorough understanding of the VRA's impact on redistricting absolutely critical. The best approach involves prioritizing compliance with the Voting Rights Act's prohibition against diluting minority voting strength. This means that when drawing new legislative districts in Alabama, the primary consideration must be to ensure that minority communities have an equal opportunity to elect representatives of their choice. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core purpose of Section 2 of the VRA, which prohibits voting practices or procedures that discriminate on the basis of race, color, or membership in a language minority group. Alabama's redistricting plans must be scrutinized to ensure they do not create districts that, while appearing neutral on their face, effectively diminish the ability of minority voters to participate effectively in the electoral process. This requires a proactive assessment of potential discriminatory effects, rather than a reactive defense after a challenge. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on maximizing the incumbent party's advantage or maintaining existing political power structures, without adequately considering the VRA's implications. This fails to acknowledge that the VRA supersedes partisan political considerations when those considerations lead to discriminatory outcomes for minority voters. Such an approach risks creating districts that dilute minority voting strength, even if unintentionally, and would likely face legal challenges under the VRA. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that as long as a district has a minority-majority population, it automatically complies with the VRA. This overlooks the nuanced legal tests established by courts, such as the three-pronged test from Jingles v. Thornburg, which considers factors beyond mere population percentages, including the geographic compactness of the minority group, evidence of racial bloc voting, and whether minority voters have been able to elect their preferred candidates. Simply creating a majority-minority district, without considering these other factors, can still result in a violation of the VRA if it is drawn in a way that unnecessarily fragments minority communities or is not geographically sensible. A further incorrect approach would be to rely on outdated redistricting practices that were in place before significant VRA jurisprudence developed. This demonstrates a lack of awareness of current legal standards and the evolution of VRA enforcement. Redistricting must be conducted with a contemporary understanding of federal law and judicial interpretations, ensuring that all new district plans are robustly defensible against claims of racial discrimination. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should begin with a comprehensive understanding of the Voting Rights Act and its application to redistricting in Alabama. This involves consulting relevant case law and guidance from federal agencies. Next, an assessment of the demographic composition and geographic distribution of minority communities within the state is essential. This data should then be used to draw proposed districts that not only comply with traditional redistricting principles, like contiguity and compactness, but more importantly, ensure that minority voters have a fair opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. Throughout the process, continuous legal review and consideration of potential discriminatory effects are paramount. Question 2. Process analysis reveals that a resident of Mobile County, Alabama, approaches an election official on the fourth Monday in October, expressing a desire to register to vote for the upcoming general election. The election official must provide accurate guidance based on Alabama election law. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally compliant response? Option A. Accept the resident's registration application, noting that it will be processed for the upcoming general election. Option B. Inform the resident that the registration deadline for the upcoming general election has passed and explain the process for registering for future elections. Option C. Advise the resident that they can register to vote on election day itself. Option D. Tell the resident to simply come to the polling place on election day and they will be able to vote. The correct answer is B. Inform the resident that the registration deadline for the upcoming general election has passed and explain the process for registering for future elections. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for election officials in Alabama, ensuring eligible citizens can exercise their right to vote while adhering strictly to statutory deadlines. The professional challenge lies in balancing the imperative of voter access with the legal requirement for timely registration, particularly when faced with a voter who is unaware of or has missed the established deadline. Misinterpreting or misapplying the registration deadlines can lead to disenfranchisement or, conversely, to the inclusion of ineligible voters, both of which have significant legal and ethical ramifications under Alabama election law. Careful judgment is required to provide accurate information and guidance without overstepping legal boundaries. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly and accurately informing the individual about the statutory registration deadline for the upcoming election in Alabama, and explaining that, due to the deadline having passed, they are ineligible to register for that specific election. This approach directly aligns with Alabama Code Section 17-3-6, which mandates that voter registration applications must be received by the judge of probate or the probate judge's designated agent no later than the close of business on the third Monday in October for general elections, or the seventh day before a primary election. Providing this precise information upholds the integrity of the electoral process by adhering to the established legal framework for voter registration. It also empowers the individual with the knowledge of when they can register for future elections. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to accept the registration application despite the deadline having passed. This action directly violates Alabama Code Section 17-3-6, which clearly defines the cutoff for registration for any given election. Such a failure to adhere to statutory deadlines undermines the fairness and legality of the election process and could lead to the invalidation of votes cast by improperly registered individuals. Another incorrect approach is to advise the individual that they can register on election day. Alabama law does not permit same-day registration for general or primary elections. Registration must be completed prior to the established deadline. This misinformation would lead to the individual attempting to vote without being properly registered, resulting in their disenfranchisement and a failure of the election official to provide accurate legal guidance. Finally, suggesting that the individual can simply show up and vote without proper registration is also incorrect. Alabama election law requires individuals to be registered voters to cast a ballot. Failing to inform the individual of the registration requirement and deadline constitutes a dereliction of duty and a failure to uphold the legal requirements for voting in the state. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama election administration must operate with a deep understanding of the state's election laws, particularly those pertaining to voter registration processes and deadlines. When faced with a voter inquiry about registration, the decision-making process should begin with identifying the specific election in question, and then referencing the relevant Alabama Code sections to determine the applicable registration deadline. The professional's duty is to provide accurate, legally compliant information. If the deadline has passed, the correct course of action is to inform the individual of this fact and provide guidance on when they can register for future elections. This approach prioritizes legal adherence and transparent communication, ensuring both the integrity of the election and the informed participation of the electorate. Question 3. Operational review demonstrates a need to clarify the governing legal framework for voter registration deadlines in Alabama, considering the principles of federalism, which approach best ensures compliance with both federal and state election law. Option A. Interpret federal court rulings on voter registration deadlines in other states as directly applicable to Alabama, overriding any conflicting state-specific deadlines. Option B. Prioritize adherence to the specific voter registration deadlines and procedures as outlined in the Code of Alabama and any accompanying regulations or directives issued by the Alabama Secretary of State, ensuring these deadlines meet or exceed any federal minimum requirements. Option C. Implement voter registration deadlines solely based on federal statutes and guidance, assuming these provide the most comprehensive and authoritative requirements for all states. Option D. Adopt voter registration deadlines based on the practices of other states that are perceived to have more efficient or modern election systems, irrespective of Alabama's specific legal requirements. The correct answer is B. Prioritize adherence to the specific voter registration deadlines and procedures as outlined in the Code of Alabama and any accompanying regulations or directives issued by the Alabama Secretary of State, ensuring these deadlines meet or exceed any federal minimum requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires navigating the complex interplay between federal and state authority in election administration within Alabama. Misinterpreting the scope of federal versus state law can lead to non-compliance, legal challenges, and undermining public trust in the electoral process. The core of the challenge lies in identifying which legal framework governs specific aspects of election operations and ensuring adherence to the most stringent applicable requirements when there is potential overlap or conflict. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves recognizing that while federal law sets certain baseline standards and protections for elections, Alabama state law, as enacted by the Alabama legislature and interpreted by the Alabama Secretary of State, provides the detailed operational framework for conducting elections within the state. This approach prioritizes understanding and implementing Alabama's specific election statutes, administrative rules, and guidance issued by state election officials, while ensuring these state provisions do not conflict with overriding federal mandates. For instance, federal law might mandate accessibility for voters with disabilities, but Alabama law will detail the specific procedures for providing accessible voting machines and polling places. Adhering to Alabama's specific laws and regulations, as long as they meet federal minimums, is the primary responsibility of election officials operating within the state. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that federal election law supersedes all state-level election administration decisions, leading to the disregard of specific Alabama election statutes. This fails to acknowledge the constitutional division of powers, where states retain significant authority over the conduct of elections, subject to federal oversight. Another incorrect approach is to solely rely on federal guidance without consulting Alabama's specific election code, potentially leading to the implementation of procedures that are not legally authorized or are contrary to state requirements. This ignores the fact that federal law often sets broad principles, while state law provides the granular operational details. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize interpretations from federal agencies or courts that may not directly address the unique operational context or specific statutory language within Alabama, leading to misapplication of federal principles. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama election administration must adopt a hierarchical approach to legal compliance. First, they must thoroughly understand and comply with all applicable Alabama election laws and regulations. Second, they must identify and comply with any federal laws or constitutional provisions that set minimum standards or prohibit certain state actions. When federal and state laws appear to conflict, the principle of federal supremacy dictates that valid federal law will prevail. However, in most operational matters, Alabama law provides the specific directives, and election officials are bound to follow them, ensuring they do not fall below federal minimums. This requires ongoing education on both state and federal election law and a commitment to consulting official state guidance. Question 4. Operational review demonstrates that the Limestone County Board of Registrars in Alabama is considering implementing new procedures for maintaining the accuracy of its voter registration list. The board has identified a need to address registrations of individuals who may have moved out of the county or are otherwise no longer eligible to vote. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the requirements of the Alabama Election Code for voter registration maintenance? Option A. Rely on unverified reports from community members and social media to identify and remove voters from the registration list who are suspected of being ineligible. Option B. Conduct a mass purge of voter registration lists based on the absence of a response to a general mailing sent to all registered voters, without prior specific notification of potential ineligibility. Option C. Proactively utilize the National Change of Address (NCOA) system and other legally authorized data sources to identify potential registration inaccuracies, and then strictly follow the Alabama Election Code's notice and cure procedures to allow voters to confirm their eligibility before any inactivation occurs. Option D. Set a voter registration deadline that is 30 days prior to the election, even though the Alabama Election Code permits registration up to 10 days before the election. The correct answer is C. Proactively utilize the National Change of Address (NCOA) system and other legally authorized data sources to identify potential registration inaccuracies, and then strictly follow the Alabama Election Code's notice and cure procedures to allow voters to confirm their eligibility before any inactivation occurs. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for election officials in Alabama due to the critical nature of voter registration accuracy and the potential for disenfranchisement. Ensuring that all eligible citizens can register to vote while preventing fraudulent registrations requires a delicate balance and strict adherence to Alabama's election laws. The challenge lies in implementing registration processes that are both accessible and secure, necessitating a thorough understanding of the Alabama Election Code. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and systematic approach to voter registration maintenance, focusing on verifying the accuracy of existing registrations through legally permissible methods. This includes utilizing the National Change of Address (NCOA) system and other data sources as authorized by the Alabama Election Code to identify voters who may have moved or are otherwise ineligible. Upon identifying potential discrepancies, the process must strictly follow the notice and cure procedures outlined in the Alabama Election Code, ensuring that voters are given ample opportunity to confirm their eligibility and correct any errors before their registration is inactivated. This approach upholds the principle of ensuring every eligible citizen has the right to vote while maintaining the integrity of the voter rolls. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves purging voter registration lists based solely on the absence of a response to a general mailing, without first employing legally mandated notification procedures. This fails to comply with the Alabama Election Code's requirements for voter list maintenance, which mandates specific notice periods and methods before a registration can be removed. Another incorrect approach is to rely on unverified third-party data or anecdotal information to remove voters from the rolls, bypassing the established verification and notification processes. This not only violates statutory requirements, but also risks removing eligible voters based on unreliable information. A third incorrect approach is to implement a registration deadline that is earlier than that permitted by Alabama law, thereby preventing eligible citizens from registering to vote within the legally prescribed timeframe. Professional reasoning. Professionals in election administration must prioritize adherence to the Alabama Election Code above all else. When faced with challenges in voter registration maintenance, the decision-making process should begin with a thorough review of the relevant statutory provisions. This involves understanding the specific requirements for voter eligibility, registration procedures, and list maintenance. The guiding principle should always be to balance the imperative of accurate voter rolls with the fundamental right of eligible citizens to vote. Any action taken must be demonstrably authorized by law and include robust notification and cure periods to protect against the erroneous removal of voters. Question 5. Cost-benefit analysis shows that ensuring accurate voter registration is paramount for election integrity in Alabama. When reviewing voter registration applications from individuals attending universities within the state, what is the most appropriate method for determining their eligibility based on residency requirements under Alabama law? Option A. Rely on the applicant's student status alone to infer that they have not established a permanent residence in Alabama and therefore are ineligible to register. Option B. Accept any applicant's declaration of intent to reside in Alabama as sufficient for registration, without requiring any corroborating evidence or further investigation. Option C. Automatically deny registration to any applicant who lists a university dormitory or campus address as their primary residence, regardless of their personal circumstances or intent. Option D. Assess the applicant's intent to establish a permanent dwelling place in Alabama, considering objective factors beyond mere physical presence at the university, such as obtaining an Alabama driver's license or registering a vehicle locally. The correct answer is D. Assess the applicant's intent to establish a permanent dwelling place in Alabama, considering objective factors beyond mere physical presence at the university, such as obtaining an Alabama driver's license or registering a vehicle locally. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama's voter registration laws, specifically concerning the residency requirements for individuals who are temporarily residing in the state for educational purposes. Misinterpreting these requirements can lead to disenfranchisement of eligible voters or the improper registration of ineligible voters, both of which have significant legal and ethical implications for election officials. Careful judgment is required to balance the state's interest in ensuring legitimate residency with the fundamental right to vote. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the Alabama Election Code, specifically focusing on the definition of residence as it applies to individuals attending educational institutions. This approach correctly identifies that Alabama law generally defines residence by the place where a person has their principal dwelling place and intends to return. For students, this often means their domicile prior to enrollment, unless they can demonstrate a clear intent to establish a new permanent residence in the college town, which typically involves actions beyond mere physical presence, such as registering a vehicle, obtaining an Alabama driver's license, or establishing financial accounts in the locality. This aligns with the principle of protecting the franchise while upholding the integrity of the voter rolls. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves automatically denying registration to any student who lists a university address as their residence, based solely on their status as a student. This fails to acknowledge that students, like any other citizen, can establish residency in a new location if they demonstrate the requisite intent. This approach violates the spirit of voter enfranchisement and may be challenged as discriminatory. Another incorrect approach is to allow registration based solely on the student's declaration of intent without any further inquiry or consideration of objective factors. While intent is a component of residency, Alabama law, like most jurisdictions, requires more than just a statement of intent. It necessitates evidence of establishing a principal dwelling place and intent to remain. This approach risks improperly registering individuals who do not meet the legal definition of residency, thereby compromising the accuracy of voter rolls. A further incorrect approach is to rely on outdated or informal interpretations of residency rules that do not reflect current Alabama election code provisions. Election officials must base their decisions on the codified law and any relevant judicial interpretations, not on anecdotal evidence or past practices that may no longer be legally sound. This can lead to inconsistent application of the law and potential legal challenges. Professional reasoning. Professionals in election administration must adopt a systematic approach to voter registration inquiries. This involves 1. Familiarizing themselves with the specific statutory definitions of residency within the Alabama Election Code. 2. Applying these definitions consistently to all applicants, regardless of their background or circumstances. 3. Seeking clarification from legal counsel or the Alabama Secretary of State's office when faced with ambiguous situations. 4. Documenting the basis for any registration decision, particularly in cases where an applicant's residency is questioned. This methodical process ensures compliance with the law, promotes fairness, and safeguards the integrity of the electoral process. Question 6. Quality control measures reveal that an election official in Mobile County, Alabama, has received a challenge to a voter's registration based on the assertion that the voter might not be a U.S. citizen. What is the most appropriate course of action for the election official to take under Alabama election law? Option A. Immediately initiate a formal challenge process, requiring the voter to provide proof of U.S. citizenship, as the assertion raises a significant concern about eligibility. Option B. Inform the challenger that while citizenship is a requirement, the assertion is insufficient and advise them to gather definitive proof of non-citizenship before resubmitting the challenge. Option C. Forward the challenge to the Alabama Secretary of State's office for their determination, as citizenship is a federal matter and beyond the scope of county-level officials. Option D. Reject the challenge outright, as the assertion is vague and lacks specific evidence of non-citizenship, and Alabama law requires concrete grounds for challenges. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate a formal challenge process, requiring the voter to provide proof of U.S. citizenship, as the assertion raises a significant concern about eligibility. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the complex intersection of voter registration processes, potential legal challenges, and the fundamental right to vote. Misinterpreting or misapplying Alabama election law regarding voter registration challenges can lead to disenfranchisement, legal repercussions for election officials, and erosion of public trust in the electoral process. Careful judgment is required to ensure adherence to statutory requirements while upholding the integrity of elections. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously reviewing the specific statutory grounds for challenging a voter's registration as outlined in the Code of Alabama. This approach requires election officials to act strictly within the bounds of the law, ensuring that any challenge is based on a legally recognized deficiency in the registration. For instance, Alabama law, e.g., Title 17 of the Code of Alabama, specifies grounds such as a voter no longer residing in the precinct or having been convicted of disqualifying felonies. A challenge must be supported by evidence that directly addresses these statutory criteria. This strict adherence to legal grounds is paramount to preventing arbitrary or discriminatory challenges and protecting the right to vote. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves initiating a challenge based on unsubstantiated rumors or general concerns about a voter's eligibility without concrete evidence. This fails to meet the evidentiary standards required by Alabama law and opens the door to politically motivated or discriminatory challenges, violating the principle of equal protection and the right to vote. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss a challenge solely because the challenger appears to have ulterior motives, without first verifying if the challenge itself has merit under Alabama law. A motive can be a factor in broader legal contexts. The immediate duty of election officials is to assess the challenge against the statutory requirements for registration. Ignoring a potentially valid challenge due to the challenger's perceived intent is a failure to follow the prescribed process. A further incorrect approach is to accept a challenge at face value and immediately remove a voter from the rolls without providing the voter an opportunity to respond or present evidence to the contrary, as often mandated by due process provisions within election statutes. Alabama law typically requires notice and an opportunity to be heard before a registration can be invalidated. This approach bypasses essential procedural safeguards. Professional reasoning. Professionals in election administration must adopt a process-oriented mindset grounded in statutory compliance. When faced with a challenge to voter registration, the primary step is to identify the specific legal grounds cited by the challenger and assess whether those grounds align with the provisions of the Code of Alabama. If the grounds are legally insufficient or lack supporting evidence, the challenge should be rejected. If the grounds are legally recognized, the process must then follow the statutory procedures for notification, hearing, and evidence presentation, ensuring due process for the voter. This systematic approach safeguards against both improper disenfranchisement and the manipulation of the registration process. Question 7. The monitoring system demonstrates a need to understand the foundational principles that have shaped Alabama's election laws. Which of the following best reflects an approach that acknowledges the historical context and evolution of election law in Alabama? Option A. Examining key legislative acts, court rulings, and societal movements that have influenced voting rights and election administration in Alabama over time. Option B. Focusing exclusively on the most recent legislative updates to Alabama's election code, disregarding prior statutes. Option C. Relying on informal discussions and past practices to interpret current election regulations in Alabama. Option D. Applying general principles of election law without specific consideration for Alabama's unique historical development. The correct answer is A. Examining key legislative acts, court rulings, and societal movements that have influenced voting rights and election administration in Alabama over time. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a need for careful consideration of historical context in Alabama election law. This scenario is professionally challenging because understanding the evolution of voting rights and regulations is crucial for interpreting current statutes and ensuring compliance. Without this historical perspective, one might misinterpret the intent behind certain provisions or overlook the foundational principles that have shaped Alabama's electoral landscape. The best approach involves a thorough examination of the historical development of election law in Alabama, including key legislative milestones, court decisions, and societal influences that have shaped voting access and administration. This includes understanding the impact of federal legislation like the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and its subsequent amendments, as well as state-level responses and adaptations. By grounding current practices in this historical context, one can accurately assess the legality and fairness of election procedures, ensuring they align with both the spirit and letter of Alabama's evolving election statutes. This approach directly addresses the need to understand the why behind current laws, fostering a deeper and more accurate application of election regulations. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the most recent amendments to Alabama election law without considering the historical trajectory. This could lead to an incomplete understanding, potentially overlooking established rights or protections that were hard-won through past struggles for suffrage. Another incorrect approach would be to apply general principles of election law without specific reference to Alabama's unique statutory framework and its historical evolution. This risks misinterpreting or misapplying regulations that are specific to the state's context. Finally, relying on anecdotal evidence or outdated interpretations of election law, divorced from their historical and legal origins, would be a significant professional failure, leading to potential violations of current Alabama election statutes. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the specific election law or procedure in question. Then, they should research its historical origins within Alabama, tracing its development through legislative changes, judicial interpretations, and relevant federal mandates. This historical understanding should then be used to analyze the current application of the law, ensuring it remains consistent with its intended purpose and legal framework. Question 8. Regulatory review indicates that during an election in Jefferson County, Alabama, a group of individuals wishes to engage in campaign activities, including handing out flyers and speaking with voters, within 100 feet of a polling place entrance. Considering the First Amendment rights related to elections and Alabama election law, what is the most appropriate course of action for election officials to take? Option A. Prohibit all campaign activities, including the distribution of literature and verbal engagement, within a 500-foot radius of the polling place to prevent any potential for voter intimidation. Option B. Allow the campaign activities only if they are conducted silently and without any visual aids, such as campaign buttons or signs, within 100 feet of the polling place. Option C. Permit the campaign activities without any restrictions, citing the absolute right to free speech under the First Amendment, regardless of proximity to the polling place. Option D. Allow the campaign activities as long as they do not physically obstruct voters or polling place operations, while ensuring the individuals are aware of any specific statutory distance limitations for direct solicitation within the polling place vicinity. The correct answer is D. Allow the campaign activities as long as they do not physically obstruct voters or polling place operations, while ensuring the individuals are aware of any specific statutory distance limitations for direct solicitation within the polling place vicinity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the fundamental First Amendment rights of free speech and association with the need to maintain the integrity and fairness of the electoral process in Alabama. Campaigning near polling places, while a form of protected speech, can potentially intimidate voters, disrupt the voting process, or lead to the appearance of impropriety, thus raising complex legal and ethical considerations under Alabama election law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves understanding the specific limitations placed on campaign activities within a certain radius of polling places, as defined by Alabama law. This approach prioritizes adherence to statutory requirements designed to protect the sanctity of the ballot box and ensure a non-coercive voting environment. By consulting the relevant sections of the Code of Alabama, specifically those pertaining to election conduct and prohibited activities near polling places, election officials can determine the precise boundaries and restrictions. This ensures that protected speech is exercised in a manner that does not infringe upon the rights of voters or the integrity of the election. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to permit all forms of campaign activity, including direct voter solicitation and distribution of campaign literature, within any distance of a polling place, arguing solely that the First Amendment guarantees absolute free speech. This fails to acknowledge that First Amendment rights are not absolute and can be subject to reasonable time, place, and manner restriction, particularly when they conflict with compelling government interests like ensuring fair elections. Alabama law specifically addresses these limitations. Another incorrect approach is to prohibit all campaign-related activities within a broad, undefined radius of any polling place without specific legal basis. This overreach would unduly restrict protected First Amendment activities and could be challenged as an unconstitutional infringement on free speech and association rights. The prohibition must be narrowly tailored to serve a legitimate government interest and clearly defined by statute. Finally, an incorrect approach is to allow campaign activities only if they are conducted silently and without any visual displays, such as signs or buttons. While the intent might be to reduce perceived intimidation, this approach may still violate the spirit and letter of Alabama election law by arbitrarily restricting forms of expression that are typically protected and may not inherently disrupt the voting process. The focus should be on the prohibited actions, such as direct solicitation or obstruction, rather than a blanket ban on all forms of visual or silent expression within a certain zone. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with overseeing elections in Alabama must adopt a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the Code of Alabama pertaining to election conduct. This involves identifying specific statutes that define prohibited activities near polling places and the permissible radius for such restrictions. When faced with a situation involving potential First Amendment conflicts, the professional should consult these statutes to determine the exact legal boundaries. If ambiguity exists, seeking guidance from the Alabama Secretary of State's office or legal counsel specializing in election law is crucial. The ultimate goal is to uphold both the constitutional rights of individuals and the integrity of the electoral process through strict adherence to established legal frameworks. Question 9. Performance analysis shows that election officials in Alabama are tasked with overseeing the legal frameworks governing party primaries. Considering the potential for procedural disputes and the need for strict adherence to state law, which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with Alabama's party primary regulations? Option A. Implement primary election procedures based on informal agreements and understandings among local party committees, without explicit reference to the Alabama Election Code. Option B. Primarily rely on the established historical practices and internal rules of the dominant political parties within the state, assuming these align with current legal mandates. Option C. Diligently consult and apply the provisions of the Alabama Election Code, ensuring all primary election activities, from candidate qualification to ballot certification, strictly adhere to statutory requirements and procedural guidelines. Option D. Prioritize the directives and preferences of influential party leaders to facilitate a smooth nomination process, even if these deviate slightly from codified election statutes. The correct answer is C. Diligently consult and apply the provisions of the Alabama Election Code, ensuring all primary election activities, from candidate qualification to ballot certification, strictly adhere to statutory requirements and procedural guidelines. Explanation. Performance analysis shows that ensuring compliance with Alabama's party primary and caucus legal frameworks presents a professionally challenging scenario due to the intricate nature of election law, the potential for partisan disputes, and the need for strict adherence to procedural rules to maintain the integrity of the electoral process. Careful judgment is required to navigate these complexities and uphold the democratic principles enshrined in Alabama law. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and application of the Alabama Election Code, specifically Title 17, concerning the organization and conduct of party primaries. This approach prioritizes adherence to statutory requirements for candidate qualification, ballot access, voter eligibility within party affiliations, and the procedural rules governing the nomination process. It ensures that all actions taken are legally sound, transparent, and contribute to a fair and legitimate outcome, thereby respecting the rights of both political parties and individual voters as defined by Alabama law. An approach that focuses solely on the historical practices of a particular political party without cross-referencing current Alabama election code provisions is professionally unacceptable. This failure to consult the governing statutes can lead to the adoption of procedures that are not legally permissible, potentially invalidating primary results or disenfranchising voters. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the legal framework established by the state. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to prioritize the perceived desires of party leadership over established legal requirements. While party autonomy is a consideration, it is always subordinate to state law. Deviating from statutory mandates, even with the intention of streamlining a process or accommodating influential figures, undermines the rule of law and can expose election officials and the party itself to legal challenges and penalties. Finally, an approach that relies on informal agreements or understandings among party officials, bypassing the codified legal procedures for primaries, is also professionally unsound. Alabama law provides specific mechanisms for primary elections, including notice requirements, filing deadlines, and dispute resolution processes. Ignoring these established legal channels creates an environment ripe for disputes, lacks transparency, and fails to provide a clear, legally defensible process for nomination. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific legal requirements of the Alabama Election Code relevant to party primaries. This should be followed by a comparative analysis of proposed actions against these legal mandates, seeking clarification from legal counsel or the Alabama Secretary of State's office when ambiguities arise. Transparency and documentation of all decisions and actions are crucial to demonstrate compliance and maintain public trust. Question 10. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to reevaluate the allocation of the Alabama Election Commission's security budget for the upcoming election cycle. The Commission has identified 3 primary voting methods: in-person precinct voting, mail-in absentee voting, and early in-person voting. To ensure the most effective use of limited resources, the Commission wants to allocate the security budget proportionally to the weighted risk of each method. Based on preliminary assessments, the probability P of a security incident and the potential impact I of such an incident for each method are as follows. In-person precinct voting, P equals 0. 0.5 I equals 10 mail-in absentee voting, P equals 0. 15 I equals 8 early in-person voting, P equals 0. 0.8 I equals 9 if the total security budget is $500,000. How much should be allocated to mail-in absentee voting based on a risk score calculated as the product of probability and impact? Option A, $200,000. Option B, $100,000. Option C, $125,000. Option D, $150,000. The correct answer is D, $150,000. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in balancing the need for robust election security with the practicalities of resource allocation and voter accessibility. Election officials in Alabama must adhere to strict legal requirements for ballot security and chain of custody, while also ensuring that voting methods are accessible and efficient. The core challenge lies in quantifying and mitigating risks associated with different voting methods, particularly when faced with limited budgets and the need to maintain public trust. Careful judgment is required to select security measures that are both effective and proportionate to the identified risks, as mandated by Alabama election law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a risk-based assessment that quantifies the potential for security breaches for each voting method and allocates resources accordingly. This approach prioritizes the most vulnerable methods for enhanced security measures. For instance, if mail-in ballots are identified as having a higher risk of tampering or loss due to transit, a greater percentage of the security budget would be allocated to tracking, verification, and secure handling procedures for these ballots. This aligns with the Alabama Election Code's general mandate for secure and accurate elections, which implicitly requires a pragmatic approach to risk management. The calculation of a weighted risk score, where /RI/ is the risk score for method /I/ /PI/ is the probability of a security incident for method /I/ and /II/ is the impact of a security incident for method /I/ would be RI equals PI times II. Resources would then be allocated proportionally to RI. Incorrect approach is analysis. Allocating security resources solely based on the number of voters using each method, without considering the inherent security risks of each method, is a flawed approach. This fails to address the specific vulnerabilities that may exist in less utilized but more susceptible voting methods. For example, if a method with fewer voters has a significantly higher probability of a security breach, neglecting it in favor of a high-volume but more secure method would be a regulatory failure. Implementing identical, high-level security protocols for all voting methods, regardless of their inherent risk profile, is inefficient and wasteful. While appearing comprehensive, this approach does not strategically deploy limited resources to address the most pressing security concerns, potentially leaving more vulnerable methods underprotected relative to their risk. This deviates from the principle of effective and efficient election administration, focusing security measures exclusively on preventing voter fraud, while neglecting other security concerns such as ballot destruction, loss, or unauthorized access to voting equipment. Presence and incomplete security strategy. Alabama election law requires comprehensive security that encompasses all potential threats to the integrity of the vote, not just a single category of risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, data-driven approach to security. This involves 1. Identifying all potential voting methods used in Alabama. 2. For each method, assessing the probability of various security incidents, e.g., tampering, loss, unauthorized access, and the potential impact of such incidents. 3. Quantifying these risks, perhaps using a formula like RI equals PI times II to create a comparative risk profile. 4. Developing a security plan that allocates resources, personnel, technology, procedures in proportion to the identified risks, prioritizing methods with higher risk scores. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment and security plan based on new information, technological advancements, and evolving threats, always in compliance with the Alabama Election Code. Question 11. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to review Alabama's election laws to ensure they align with the state's constitutional framework. Considering the Alabama Constitution's provisions on voting rights and legislative authority over elections, which of the following approaches best upholds the constitutional principles governing elections in Alabama? Option A. Implementing stricter identification requirements for all voters at polling places, beyond those explicitly mandated by Alabama statute, to proactively prevent potential voter fraud. Option B. Prioritizing voter education and accessibility while strictly adhering to all established statutory requirements for voter registration and absentee voting, ensuring that any administrative procedures do not create undue burdens on eligible voters. Option C. Allowing election officials broad discretion to interpret and apply election laws on a case-by-case basis to address perceived irregularities, even if it deviates from established statutory procedures. Option D. Focusing solely on streamlining election administration for efficiency, even if certain procedural changes might inadvertently make it more difficult for some eligible citizens to cast their ballots. The correct answer is B. Prioritizing voter education and accessibility while strictly adhering to all established statutory requirements for voter registration and absentee voting, ensuring that any administrative procedures do not create undue burdens on eligible voters. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the delicate balance between ensuring voter access and maintaining the integrity of election processes, all within the specific constitutional framework of Alabama. Misinterpreting or misapplying constitutional provisions can lead to disenfranchisement or undermine public trust in elections. Careful judgment is required to uphold both the spirit and letter of Alabama's foundational laws governing elections. The best approach involves a thorough understanding of the Alabama Constitution's provisions regarding voting rights and election administration, coupled with a commitment to equitable application. This means recognizing that the Constitution establishes the fundamental right to vote and empowers the legislature to enact laws for its orderly exercise, while also acknowledging that any legislative enactments must not infringe upon these fundamental rights. Prioritizing voter education and accessibility, while ensuring compliance with established legal procedures for registration and voting, aligns with the constitutional mandate to facilitate, not hinder, the exercise of suffrage. This approach upholds the principle that the Constitution is the supreme law and all election practices must conform to its dictates, ensuring that the will of the people is accurately reflected. An incorrect approach would be to interpret constitutional provisions in a manner that unduly restricts voter access based on assumptions about potential fraud without specific legislative authorization or constitutional basis. For instance, implementing stringent, non-statutorily mandated identification requirements that disproportionately affect certain demographics could violate the equal protection principles implicitly or explicitly embedded within the Alabama Constitution's guarantee of voting rights. Such an approach fails to recognize that the Constitution aims to protect the franchise for all eligible citizens. Another incorrect approach would be to disregard established legislative procedures for voter registration and absentee voting, citing a broad interpretation of election integrity that bypasses legal frameworks. The Alabama Constitution grants the legislature the power to prescribe election laws. Deviating from these laws, even with the intention of enhancing security, undermines the rule of law and the constitutional order established for elections. This approach fails to respect the separation of powers and the legislative authority to define election processes. Finally, an approach that prioritizes administrative convenience over constitutional guarantees of voting rights is also flawed. While efficient administration is desirable, it cannot come at the expense of fundamental rights. If administrative processes create barriers to voting that are not constitutionally or statutorily justified, they are unacceptable. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-step approach. First, identify the specific constitutional provisions and relevant Alabama statutes governing the election issue at hand. Second, analyze how proposed actions or policies align with these legal frameworks, paying close attention to any potential conflicts or ambiguities. Third, consider the practical impact of these actions on voter access and election integrity, always erring on the side of protecting the fundamental right to vote, unless a compelling, constitutionally permissible reason exists to do otherwise. Finally, consult legal counsel or relevant election officials when in doubt to ensure full compliance with Alabama law. Question 12. The efficiency study reveals a significant difference in voter turnout percentages between Precinct A and Precinct B in Alabama, with Precinct B consistently showing lower turnout. Precinct A is predominantly white, while Precinct B has a substantial minority population. The study suggests that consolidating polling locations to a single, centrally located facility for both precincts could improve administrative efficiency and reduce costs. As an election official responsible for implementing such changes, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with federal voting rights protections? Option A. Proceed with the polling place consolidation as recommended by the efficiency study, as the primary goal is to improve administrative efficiency and reduce costs for the election process in Alabama. Option B. Conduct a detailed analysis of Precinct B's demographic composition and historical voting patterns. Investigate potential barriers to voting such as transportation, language access, and polling place accessibility for residents of Precinct B, and consult with legal counsel to determine if any proposed consolidation would disproportionately affect minority voters before making any decisions. Option C. Implement the polling place consolidation immediately and then, if any complaints arise from Precinct B, address them on a case-by-case basis. Option D. Inform the residents of Precinct B that their lower turnout is likely due to a lack of interest and that the consolidation will streamline the process for all voters, without further investigation into specific barriers. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed analysis of Precinct B's demographic composition and historical voting patterns. Investigate potential barriers to voting such as transportation, language access, and polling place accessibility for residents of Precinct B, and consult with legal counsel to determine if any proposed consolidation would disproportionately affect minority voters before making any decisions. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a potential disparity in voter turnout across certain precincts in Alabama, prompting an internal review. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the imperative to ensure efficient election administration with the fundamental obligation to uphold voting rights guaranteed by federal law, specifically the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and its subsequent amendments. Misinterpreting or inadequately addressing potential barriers to voting could lead to discriminatory outcomes, violating both legal mandates and ethical principles of fairness and equal access. Careful judgment is required to identify the root causes of any observed disparities and to implement remedies that are both effective and legally compliant. The best approach involves a thorough, data-driven investigation into the specific factors contributing to the observed turnout differences. This includes examining precinct-level data for potential correlations with demographic information, accessibility of polling places, availability of language assistance, and the effectiveness of voter outreach efforts. The goal is to identify any practices or conditions that may disproportionately affect the ability of certain groups, particularly racial or ethnic minorities, to register and vote. If evidence suggests a violation of the Voting Rights Act, the appropriate action is to consult with legal counsel specializing in election law and to proactively develop and implement remedies that ensure equal access to the ballot box for all eligible citizens in Alabama. This aligns with the core purpose of the Voting Rights Act, which is to prohibit discriminatory voting practices and to ensure that all citizens have an equal opportunity to participate in the electoral process. An approach that focuses solely on administrative efficiency without a deep dive into potential discriminatory impacts is professionally unacceptable. This could involve implementing changes that, while appearing efficient on the surface, inadvertently create new barriers for protected groups. For instance, consolidating polling places in areas with a high concentration of minority voters without considering transportation challenges or language needs would likely violate the spirit and letter of the Voting Rights Act. Similarly, reducing voter outreach in specific communities based on perceived lower engagement without investigating the underlying reasons for that engagement risks disenfranchisement and is ethically unsound. Another unacceptable approach would be to dismiss the efficiency study's findings without any further investigation, assuming that any turnout disparities are simply a reflection of voter apathy rather than systemic issues. This inaction fails to address potential violations of federal law and abdicates the responsibility to ensure equitable access to voting. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical considerations. This involves 1. Acknowledging and investigating all findings, especially those that suggest potential disparities. 2. Conducting a comprehensive analysis to understand the root causes, considering legal requirements like the Voting Rights Act. 3. Consulting with legal experts to ensure all proposed actions are compliant. 4. Developing and implementing solutions that actively promote equal access and participation for all voters. 5. Continuously monitoring the effectiveness of implemented solutions and making adjustments as necessary. Question 13. Governance review demonstrates that the current voter registration process in a rural county in Alabama, which relies heavily on mail-in applications and limited in-person registration events at the county courthouse, may be creating significant barriers for elderly residents and individuals with limited mobility who reside far from the courthouse. Considering the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and its implications for voting rights in Alabama, which of the following approaches best addresses this potential disparity? Option A. Implement a new online voter registration portal without first assessing its accessibility for all demographic groups, focusing on modernization and efficiency. Option B. Proactively expand the number and geographic distribution of in-person voter registration drives throughout the county, including partnerships with community centers and senior living facilities, and ensure registration forms are available in accessible formats and languages. Option C. Continue with the current mail-in and courthouse-based registration system, as it is the established procedure and all eligible voters have the legal right to access it. Option D. Advise residents experiencing difficulties with registration to seek assistance from family members or community volunteers, without direct intervention from election officials. Correct answer is B. Proactively expand the number and geographic distribution of in-person voter registration drives throughout the county, including partnerships with community centers and senior living facilities, and ensure registration forms are available in accessible formats and languages. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for election officials in Alabama by requiring them to balance the practicalities of voter registration with the fundamental constitutional right to equal protection under the law. The challenge lies in ensuring that administrative processes do not inadvertently create barriers that disproportionately affect certain groups of voters, thereby violating the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment as applied to voting rights in Alabama. Careful judgment is required to interpret and implement registration procedures in a manner that is both efficient and equitable. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively identifying and addressing potential disparities in voter registration access. This means reviewing existing registration processes, such as the location and accessibility of registration sites, the clarity of instructions, and the availability of assistance for individuals with disabilities or language barriers. The justification for this approach stems directly from the Equal Protection Clause, which prohibits states from denying any person within their jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. In the context of voting, this means that registration procedures must not be designed or administered in a way that discriminates against any group of citizens, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Alabama election law, like federal law, mandates that all eligible citizens have an equal opportunity to register and vote. This approach directly upholds that principle by seeking to remove systemic obstacles. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to maintain the current registration process without review, arguing that it has been in place for a long time and has not been explicitly challenged. This fails to acknowledge the proactive duty to ensure equal protection. The Equal Protection Clause requires that laws be applied equally, and a process that, in practice, creates unequal burdens on certain groups, even if not explicitly discriminatory on its face, can violate this principle. Another incorrect approach is to implement changes to registration procedures based solely on administrative convenience or cost savings, without considering the potential impact on voter access for protected classes. Such an approach risks creating new barriers or exacerbating existing ones, thereby infringing upon the right to equal protection. Finally, an approach that dismisses concerns about registration access by stating that all eligible voters have the same legal right to register, regardless of their circumstances, ignores the practical realities of access and the constitutional mandate for equal protection in its application. The law guarantees an equal right, but the state has a responsibility to ensure that the means to exercise that right are equally accessible. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama's election administration should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional compliance and equitable access. This involves a continuous cycle of assessment, implementation, and evaluation of registration processes. When faced with potential disparities, the first step should be to consult relevant Alabama election law and federal constitutional principles, particularly the Equal Protection Clause. This should be followed by an analysis of the practical impact of current procedures on diverse populations. Solutions should then be developed collaboratively, involving stakeholders and legal counsel, to ensure they are both effective and legally sound. The ultimate goal is to foster a registration system that is accessible to all eligible citizens, thereby upholding the integrity of the democratic process. Question 14. Governance review demonstrates that Alabama's voter identification laws, while intended to secure the electoral process, may present challenges for certain eligible voters in obtaining the necessary identification, potentially impacting registration and turnout. Considering the ethical obligation to facilitate voting and ensure equitable access, what is the most professionally responsible approach for election officials to adopt? Option A. Develop and implement robust outreach and assistance programs to help voters obtain the required identification, including partnerships with local agencies and mobile identification units. Option B. Limit the availability of voter identification assistance to designated county offices during standard business hours. Option C. Focus solely on educating voters about the specific types of identification accepted, without providing direct assistance in obtaining them. Option D. Strictly enforce the voter identification requirements as stipulated by Alabama law, with no additional measures to assist voters in acquiring identification. Correct answer is A. Develop and implement robust outreach and assistance programs to help voters obtain the required identification, including partnerships with local agencies and mobile identification units. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for election officials in Alabama by requiring them to balance the implementation of voter identification requirements with the fundamental right to vote and the ethical imperative to ensure equitable access to the electoral process. The tension lies in ensuring compliance with Alabama's voter ID laws while actively mitigating potential barriers that could disproportionately affect certain segments of the population, thereby impacting voter turnout. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests ethically and legally. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively developing and implementing comprehensive outreach and assistance programs specifically designed to help voters obtain the required identification. This approach directly addresses the potential negative impact of voter ID laws on registration and turnout by providing tangible solutions. Alabama law, while mandating voter ID, also implicitly supports the goal of facilitating voting. Ethically, this approach aligns with the principle of ensuring all eligible citizens have a reasonable opportunity to exercise their franchise. It demonstrates a commitment to voter education and support, going beyond mere compliance to actively promote participation. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to strictly enforce the voter ID law without any accompanying measures to assist voters in obtaining the necessary identification. This fails to acknowledge the potential disparate impact of such laws and can lead to disenfranchisement, which is ethically problematic and undermines the democratic principle of broad participation. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on voter education about the ID requirements without offering practical assistance in acquiring the documents. While education is important, it does not solve the underlying problem for those who face significant hurdles in obtaining identification. This approach risks leaving vulnerable populations behind. Finally, an approach that prioritizes administrative convenience over voter accessibility, such as limiting the hours or locations for obtaining assistance with voter ID, would also be professionally unacceptable. This prioritizes efficiency over the fundamental right to vote and could disproportionately disenfranchise voters who cannot easily access these limited resources. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a framework that prioritizes voter access and equitable participation while adhering to legal mandates. This involves a proactive assessment of potential barriers created by voter ID laws, followed by the development of targeted strategies to overcome those barriers. Collaboration with community organizations, leveraging available resources for identification assistance, and continuous evaluation of program effectiveness are crucial components of this decision-making process. The ultimate goal is to ensure that legal requirements do not unduly impede the exercise of the right to vote for any eligible citizen in Alabama. Question 15. System analysis indicates that an election official in Alabama is assisting voters with absentee ballot applications. A voter who is elderly and has difficulty with fine motor skills asks the official to fill in their date of birth on the application because they are struggling to write it legibly. The official knows the voter's correct date of birth. What is the most appropriate course of action for the election official to take, adhering strictly to Alabama election law? Option A. Fill in the voter's date of birth on the application for them, as the official knows the correct information and wishes to ensure the application is processed without delay. Option B. Advise the voter that if they cannot complete the application themselves, they may not be eligible to vote by absentee ballot and should consider voting in person on election day. Option C. Suggest that a family member or caregiver who is present with the voter complete the date of birth section on their behalf. Option D. Politely explain to the voter the specific requirements for completing the absentee ballot application, including the need for their personal legible completion, and offer to provide a larger pen or a different surface to assist them in writing it themselves, while ensuring they understand the importance of their own handwriting for verification purposes. Correct answer is D. Politely explain to the voter the specific requirements for completing the absentee ballot application, including the need for their personal legible completion, and offer to provide a larger pen or a different surface to assist them in writing it themselves, while ensuring they understand the importance of their own handwriting for verification purposes. Explanation. System analysis indicates that election officials in Alabama face complex ethical dilemmas when balancing voter accessibility with the integrity of the voting process, particularly concerning absentee voting. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama's election laws, the potential for voter disenfranchisement, and the imperative to prevent fraud. The pressure to ensure every eligible vote is counted, while upholding strict legal procedures, demands careful judgment and adherence to established protocols. The best approach involves prioritizing voter education and clear communication regarding the specific requirements for absentee ballots in Alabama. This includes ensuring that voters are fully informed about the deadlines, the necessity of proper identification or witness signatures where required by Alabama law, and the correct procedures for returning their ballots. This method is correct because it directly addresses potential barriers to voting by empowering voters with accurate information, thereby minimizing the risk of ballots being rejected due to technical errors or misunderstandings, while simultaneously reinforcing the legal framework governing absentee voting in Alabama. It aligns with the ethical duty to facilitate participation while respecting the law. An incorrect approach involves proactively assisting voters in completing their absentee ballots by filling in information on their behalf, even if the voter requests it. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound because it can lead to undue influence or coercion, potentially compromising the secrecy and voluntariness of the vote, which are fundamental principles of fair elections under Alabama law. Furthermore, it blurs the lines of responsibility and could inadvertently lead to errors or misrepresentations on the ballot. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss an absentee ballot solely because the voter made a minor, non-substantive error, such as a slight misspelling of their name, without first attempting to verify the voter's identity or providing an opportunity for correction as permitted by Alabama election statutes. This fails to uphold the principle of ensuring every eligible vote is counted, and can lead to the disenfranchisement of voters for reasons that do not fundamentally affect the validity of their intent. Alabama law often provides avenues for curing minor defects. Finally, an incorrect approach is to advise voters to submit their absentee ballots through unofficial third-party channels, such as community organizers or political operatives, rather than through the statutorily prescribed methods of return. This is problematic because it bypasses the secure chain of custody for ballots, increasing the risk of tampering, loss, or undue influence, and violates the specific provisions of Alabama election law regarding ballot submission. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of the specific Alabama election code provisions related to absentee voting. Officials must prioritize voter education and clear, legally compliant guidance. When faced with voter inquiries or potential issues, the process should involve consulting the relevant statutes and administrative rules, seeking clarification from superiors or legal counsel if necessary, and always acting in a manner that upholds both voter access and the integrity of the election process as defined by Alabama law. Question 16. Quality control measures reveal that a county election official in Alabama is considering adopting a new electronic voting system that promises enhanced accessibility features and faster tabulation. However, concerns have been raised about the system's untested security protocols and the potential for undiscovered vulnerabilities. Which of the following actions best navigates the legal implications of implementing this new system within Alabama's election framework? Option A. Proceed with the deployment of the new system, relying on the vendor's assurances of security and efficiency, and address any discovered issues post-election. Option B. Implement the new system with only basic functionality checks, prioritizing rapid adoption to meet modernization goals, and deferring comprehensive security audits until after the election. Option C. Conduct thorough pre-election testing and seek official certification of the new electronic voting system by the Alabama Secretary of State before any deployment, ensuring all audit trail functionalities are verified. Option D. Deploy the system for a limited number of precincts as a pilot program without formal state certification, with the intention of gathering user feedback before a full rollout. The correct answer is C. Conduct thorough pre-election testing and seek official certification of the new electronic voting system by the Alabama Secretary of State before any deployment, ensuring all audit trail functionalities are verified. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a county election official to balance the imperative of technological advancement in voting with the stringent legal requirements for the security and integrity of the electoral process in Alabama. The introduction of new electronic voting systems, while potentially increasing efficiency and accessibility, carries inherent risks that must be meticulously managed to comply with Alabama's election laws, particularly concerning voter privacy, system security, and auditability. Failure to adhere to these laws can lead to legal challenges, erosion of public trust, and compromised election outcomes. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive, multifaceted approach that prioritizes rigorous testing and certification of any new electronic voting system before its deployment in an Alabama election. This approach aligns directly with the principles enshrined in Alabama election law, which mandates that voting systems must be certified by the Alabama Secretary of State and meet specific security and accuracy standards. This includes thorough pre-election testing, logic and accuracy testing, and ensuring the system's audit trail capabilities are robust and verifiable. The focus is on proactive risk mitigation and adherence to established legal protocols to safeguard the integrity of the vote. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the deployment of the new system based solely on vendor assurances of security and efficiency. This fails to meet Alabama's legal requirement for independent certification and testing. Relying solely on vendor claims bypasses the crucial oversight mandated by law, leaving the election vulnerable to undiscovered vulnerabilities and potentially invalidating the election results if challenges arise. Another unacceptable approach is to implement the new system with minimal testing, arguing that the urgency to modernize outweighs the need for exhaustive validation. Alabama election law does not permit such a trade-off. The legal framework demands that all voting systems, whether new or existing, undergo prescribed testing and certification processes to ensure they accurately record and count votes and maintain a verifiable audit trail. This approach disregards the legal safeguards designed to protect the democratic process. A further flawed approach is to deploy the system and then address any discovered security or accuracy issues reactively. Alabama law requires a proactive stance on election integrity. The legal implications of deploying an unproven or inadequately tested system are severe, potentially leading to disenfranchisement, recounts, and legal battles that undermine public confidence. The emphasis must be on preventing issues through diligent pre-deployment measures, not on correcting them after the fact. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation must adopt a risk management framework grounded in legal compliance. This involves understanding the specific requirements of Alabama election law regarding voting systems, including certification, testing, and security protocols. A systematic approach should include 1. Thoroughly researching and understanding the relevant Alabama code sections pertaining to voting machines and electronic voting systems. 2. Engaging in a comprehensive vendor vetting process that includes verification of state certification and independent security audits. 3. Planning and executing all legally mandated pre-election testing, including logic and accuracy tests, with appropriate public observation. 4. Establishing clear protocols for addressing any issues that arise during testing or deployment, ensuring these align with legal remedies and reporting requirements. The ultimate goal is to ensure that any voting system used in Alabama elections is secure, accurate, and legally compliant, thereby upholding the integrity of the democratic process. Question 17. Quality control measures reveal that a proposed ballot initiative in Alabama aimed at amending local zoning ordinances has been submitted with signatures that appear to meet the numerical threshold, but may have minor discrepancies in the notarization process as required by Alabama election law. As an election official responsible for certifying ballot measures, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Alabama's regulatory framework? Option A. Seek informal guidance from local political party leaders on how to handle the notarization issue, as they may have experience with similar situations in Alabama. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the notarization process for each submitted signature against the specific requirements outlined in the Code of Alabama, and if minor, correctable errors are found, provide the proponents an opportunity to cure these defects within a legally defined timeframe before certifying the initiative. Option C. Allow the initiative to proceed to the ballot, prioritizing the spirit of direct democracy and citizen participation, even if minor procedural irregularities in notarization are present, assuming the intent of the voters is clear. Option D. Reject the initiative outright based on the observed notarization discrepancies, citing a strict interpretation of the law without allowing for any potential for correction or further review by the proponents. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the notarization process for each submitted signature against the specific requirements outlined in the Code of Alabama, and if minor, correctable errors are found, provide the proponents an opportunity to cure these defects within a legally defined timeframe before certifying the initiative. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for an election official in Alabama due to the inherent tension between facilitating public participation through ballot initiatives and ensuring the integrity and legality of the process. The official must balance the desire to allow citizens to propose and vote on laws with the strict requirements of Alabama election law governing the qualification and placement of such measures on the ballot. Careful judgment is required to avoid both disenfranchising voters by improperly excluding initiatives and undermining the law by improperly including them. The best approach involves a meticulous review of the proposed ballot initiative against the specific requirements outlined in the Code of Alabama, particularly Title 17, Elections. This includes verifying that the initiative meets all constitutional and statutory prerequisites for placement on the ballot, such as proper signature verification procedures, adherence to filing deadlines, and ensuring the subject matter is permissible under Alabama law for an initiative. This approach is correct because it prioritizes strict adherence to the established legal framework, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the electoral process and upholding the rule of law as mandated by Alabama election statutes. It ensures that only legally qualified initiatives are presented to the voters, preventing potential legal challenges and maintaining public trust. An approach that involves prioritizing the spirit of direct democracy over the letter of the law, by allowing the initiative to proceed to the ballot despite minor procedural irregularities, is incorrect. This failure to adhere to the Code of Alabama's specific requirements for ballot initiatives risks invalidating the election results for that measure and could lead to legal injunctions. It undermines the established legal safeguards designed to ensure fairness and prevent fraud or manipulation in the initiative process. Another incorrect approach would be to unilaterally reject the initiative based on a personal interpretation of its potential impact or public sentiment, without a thorough review against the codified legal requirements. This constitutes an overreach of authority and a violation of the official's duty to apply the law impartially. Alabama election law provides specific criteria for qualification, and personal judgment or political considerations are not grounds for disqualification if the initiative meets those legal standards. Finally, an approach that involves seeking informal advice from political allies or non-legal experts outside of the established legal review process is professionally unsound. While consultation can be valuable, the ultimate decision must be grounded in a rigorous interpretation of Alabama election law. Relying on informal or politically motivated advice can lead to misinterpretations of the law and result in decisions that are legally indefensible, potentially exposing the election official and the state to litigation. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant sections of the Code of Alabama pertaining to ballot initiatives. This should be followed by a systematic, documented review of the initiative against each legal requirement. If any ambiguities arise, the official should consult the Alabama Attorney General's office or legal counsel specializing in election law for definitive guidance, ensuring all decisions are legally sound and procedurally correct. Question 18. Quality control measures reveal that the proposed ballot design for the upcoming municipal elections in Birmingham, Alabama, features a modern, minimalist aesthetic. However, a review of the design indicates that candidate names are presented in a smaller font than typically used for official documents, and the order of ballot questions deviates from the sequence outlined in the Alabama Code. The election board is considering whether to approve this design. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with Alabama election law and the integrity of the voting process? Option A. Prioritize the modern aesthetic of the ballot, allowing the smaller font and altered question order, believing that a visually appealing ballot will encourage higher voter turnout. Option B. Instruct the graphic design firm to make minor adjustments to the font size and question order based on their professional judgment, without a detailed cross-reference to the specific requirements of the Alabama Code. Option C. Mandate that the ballot design strictly adheres to all specifications for font size, spacing, and the order of candidate names and ballot questions as stipulated in the Alabama Code, even if it means sacrificing some aesthetic modernizations. Option D. Approve the design, assuming that the smaller font size is acceptable as long as the names are legible, and that the deviation in ballot question order is minor and unlikely to confuse voters. The correct answer is C. Mandate that the ballot design strictly adheres to all specifications for font size, spacing, and the order of candidate names and ballot questions as stipulated in the Alabama Code, even if it means sacrificing some aesthetic modernizations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for election officials in Alabama concerning the legal requirements for ballot design. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for clear, understandable ballots with the specific mandates of Alabama election law. Misinterpreting or overlooking these mandates can lead to disenfranchisement, legal challenges, and a loss of public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance while also facilitating voter participation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously adhering to the Alabama Code regarding ballot content, format, and printing specifications. This includes ensuring that all required information, such as candidate names, party affiliations, where applicable, and ballot question text, is presented accurately and legibly. Furthermore, it necessitates strict compliance with any specified font sizes, spacing, and the order of information as dictated by state law. This approach is correct because it directly fulfills the legal obligations set forth by the Alabama legislature, which are designed to ensure uniformity, prevent voter confusion, and maintain the integrity of the electoral process. The Alabama Code, particularly sections related to election procedures and ballot preparation, provides the definitive framework for what constitutes a legally compliant ballot. Incorrect approaches analysis. Prioritizing aesthetic appeal over legal mandates is professionally unacceptable. While visually pleasing ballots might seem desirable, Alabama election law does not permit deviations from its specific requirements for the sake of aesthetics. Such an approach fails to meet the fundamental legal standard for ballot design and could render the ballots invalid. Adopting a design that simplifies candidate information to the point of omitting legally required details, such as party affiliation or the full text of ballot propositions, is also professionally unacceptable. Alabama law specifies what information must appear on the ballot to inform voters adequately. Omitting this information, even with the intention of making the ballot appear less cluttered, directly violates these legal requirements and hinders voters' ability to make informed choices. Relying solely on the recommendations of a graphic design firm, without cross-referencing their proposals against the specific provisions of the Alabama Code, is professionally unsound. While external expertise can be valuable, the ultimate responsibility for legal compliance rests with the election officials. A design firm may not be aware of or prioritize the precise legal stipulations of Alabama election law, leading to inadvertent violations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in election administration must adopt a systematic approach to ballot design. This begins with a thorough review and understanding of the relevant sections of the Alabama Code pertaining to ballot content, format, and printing. All design proposals should then be rigorously evaluated against these legal requirements. A checklist derived from the Alabama Code can be an effective tool for ensuring all mandated elements are present and correctly formatted. When in doubt, consulting with legal counsel specializing in election law is a prudent step. The primary objective is always legal compliance, followed by clarity and accessibility for all voters. Question 19. Implementation of a new electronic poll book system across all polling places in Alabama is being considered. What approach best ensures compliance with Alabama's election laws regarding accessibility for voters with disabilities? Option A. Implement the electronic poll book system and rely on poll workers to informally assist any voters who report difficulties, without specific predefined accessibility protocols or independent verification of the system's features. Option B. Adopt the electronic poll book system if the vendor provides a general statement confirming compliance with accessibility standards, assuming this is sufficient to meet Alabama's legal requirements. Option C. Prioritize the adoption of the electronic poll book system based on its reported efficiency gains and cost savings, with a plan to address any accessibility issues that may arise after its initial implementation. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive pre-implementation accessibility audit of the electronic poll book system, involving user testing with individuals representing diverse disabilities, and develop specific training protocols for poll workers to assist voters with accessibility needs, all before the system is deployed. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive pre-implementation accessibility audit of the electronic poll book system, involving user testing with individuals representing diverse disabilities, and develop specific training protocols for poll workers to assist voters with accessibility needs, all before the system is deployed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for election officials in Alabama by requiring them to balance the imperative of ensuring accessibility for all voters with the practicalities of implementing new voting methods. The core difficulty lies in interpreting and applying Alabama's election laws regarding accessibility to diverse voter needs, particularly for individuals with disabilities, while also considering the logistical and financial constraints of adopting new technologies or procedures. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance without creating undue burdens or disenfranchising any segment of the electorate. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and comprehensive assessment of how proposed new voting methods will impact voters with disabilities, aligning with the principles of the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA) and Alabama's specific election laws that mandate accessible voting. This approach prioritizes identifying potential barriers and developing concrete solutions before implementation. For instance, if a new electronic poll book system is being considered, this approach would necessitate testing its compatibility with screen readers, ensuring adequate contrast for visually impaired users, and providing alternative input methods. The justification for this approach is rooted in Alabama Code Title 17, which outlines the rights of voters and the responsibilities of election officials to ensure equal access to the ballot. Specifically, sections pertaining to voter assistance and the provision of accessible voting machines directly support this proactive, solution-oriented methodology. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a new voting method without a thorough pre-implementation accessibility audit for voters with disabilities fails to meet the legal and ethical obligations under Alabama law. This oversight risks creating insurmountable barriers for individuals with visual, auditory, motor, or cognitive impairments, thereby violating their fundamental right to vote. Adopting a new voting method solely based on its perceived technological advancement or cost efficiency, without independently verifying its accessibility features, is also professionally unacceptable. While efficiency and modernity are desirable, they cannot supersede the legal mandate for accessibility. This approach prioritizes convenience over compliance and voter rights. Relying on vendor assurances of accessibility without independent verification or testing by election officials is a significant ethical and legal misstep. Vendors may have varying interpretations of accessibility standards, and election officials in Alabama are ultimately responsible for ensuring their voting systems comply with state and federal law. This approach outsources a critical responsibility and can lead to non-compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama election administration should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the legal requirements for voter accessibility as defined in Alabama Code Title 17 and relevant federal laws like the ADA. This framework should then incorporate a systematic process for evaluating any proposed changes to voting methods. This includes conducting thorough accessibility impact assessments, engaging with disability advocacy groups for input, prioritizing solutions that offer multiple accessible options, and ensuring robust training for poll workers on assisting voters with diverse needs. The ultimate goal is to ensure that all eligible citizens of Alabama can cast their ballot independently and privately, regardless of their abilities. Question 20. To address the challenge of ensuring all eligible citizens in Alabama can cast their ballots in the upcoming general primary election, a county election official needs to determine the precise deadline for voter registration. If the general primary election is scheduled for Tuesday, November 5, 2024, an Alabama law stipulates that voter registration must be completed by the close of business on the third Monday preceding the election. What is the final date by which a new voter must have their registration application officially processed to be eligible to vote in this election? Option A, October 14, 2024. Option B, October 21, 2024. Option C, November 4, 2024. Option D, October 28, 2024. The correct answer is B, October 21, 2024. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in accurately calculating voter registration deadlines, which are critical for ensuring eligible citizens can participate in Alabama elections. Misinterpreting or misapplying the statutory deadlines can lead to disenfranchisement and legal challenges, underscoring the need for meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of Alabama election law. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves directly consulting the Alabama Code, specifically Title 17, Chapter 3, which governs voter registration. This section clearly outlines the statutory deadlines. For the general primary election, registration must be completed by the close of business on the third Monday preceding the election. To calculate this, one must identify the date of the primary election and then count backward to the third Monday. If the election is on Tuesday, November 5, 2024, the third Monday preceding it would be October 21, 2024. Therefore, the registration deadline is October 21, 2024. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the codified law of Alabama, ensuring compliance and accuracy. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to rely on a general understanding of election deadlines without consulting the specific Alabama statutes. This could lead to using a generic deadline, such as 30 days before the election, which may not align with Alabama's specific third Monday rule, resulting in an inaccurate deadline and potential disenfranchisement. Another incorrect approach would be to calculate the deadline based on the date the voter asterisk requests asterisk registration rather than the date the registration is asterisk completed asterisk and received by the appropriate election official. Alabama law, as outlined in the code, specifies the deadline for asterisk completion asterisk of registration, meaning the application must be in the hands of the registrar or postmarked by the deadline. A further incorrect approach would be to assume the deadline is the same for all types of elections, e.g., primary, general, special, without verifying if Alabama law differentiates these deadlines. While the third Monday rule is common for general elections, specific provisions might exist for other election types, and failing to check this could lead to errors. Professional reasoning. Professionals must prioritize consulting the authoritative legal text for the jurisdiction in question. When dealing with deadlines, a step-by-step calculation based on the statutory language is essential. It is crucial to understand the precise wording of the law regarding when registration is considered completed, and to verify if different election types have distinct deadlines. This systematic and text-based approach minimizes the risk of errors and ensures compliance with Alabama election law.